Virgo. Um, okay, so sometimes the hand that pushes someone away is shaking the entire time it does it. That is the image Spirit gave me the instant I opened this energy for you today, Virgo. Not a confident, decisive person walking away from something they no longer wanted. Someone whose actions and whose actual feelings have become completely disconnected from each other, creating distance with their behavior while every other part of them is screaming the opposite. This is one of the more painful dynamics I encounter in this work because it means the separation between you was never really about a lack of love. It was about something getting tangled badly between feeling and acting. I want to walk you through exactly what happened here. Why this person created distance they genuinely did not want. What it means that their actions and their actual internal experience have been working against each other, and what this contradiction is doing to them now. Stay with me through every layer of this because there is real complexity here that deserves careful, honest unpacking. Let me describe what I felt the moment this energy opened, because the very first impression always carries important signal about what we are dealing with. I felt internal conflict immediately, a specific uncomfortable tension that exists when someone's behavior and someone's heart are pointing in two different directions simultaneously. This is not the energy of someone who made a clean, considered decision to step back. This is the energy of someone whose actions have betrayed their own deeper feelings, almost as if some part of them took control and acted against what the rest of them actually wanted. I also felt confusion present in their own experience of themselves, which is a significant detail worth noting. This is not someone who fully understands their own behavior right now. They have likely been asking themselves, even in private moments, why they did what they did, why they continued the distance even when every instinct in them wanted to close it instead. I want to talk about how this separation actually began because understanding the origin matters significantly to everything else in this reading. I am sensing this did not start as a deliberate, planned decision. It started smaller than that, perhaps as a single moment of withdrawal during a vulnerable conversation, a pulling back when things felt like they were becoming too significant too quickly. This single moment of retreat then created its own momentum, almost like a small crack that, left unaddressed, slowly widened into something much larger than what either of you initially intended. I am also sensing that once this person began creating distance, a strange psychological pattern took hold, one where continuing the distance felt easier than admitting the original retreat had been a mistake. There is a particular kind of stubbornness that develops in moments like this, not stubbornness rooted in genuine conviction, but stubbornness rooted in the discomfort of having to acknowledge vulnerability or error. Each day the distance continued, it became slightly harder to reverse, not because the feelings had changed, but because the pattern itself had gained its own inertia. I want to expand on this idea of inertia because I think it explains a great deal about why this situation has persisted longer than this person's actual feelings would seem to justify. Human behavior often follows the path of least resistance once a pattern establishes itself, even when that pattern contradicts a person's deeper desires. The longer someone maintains distance, the more that distance becomes its own kind of identity, a story they have told themselves and possibly others about why they stepped back, even when the underlying truth of their feelings never actually matched that story. Reversing course requires not just admitting the original action was wrong, but also potentially admitting to anyone who witnessed the separation that the explanation they offered, if any, was incomplete or inaccurate. I also want to address the specific quality of self-protection embedded in this entire dynamic. Maintaining distance, however painful, can feel safer than the vulnerability required to reverse course and risk further rejection or hurt. This person may have told themselves that staying distant, even while wanting closeness, protects them from a different kind of pain, the pain of trying to reconnect and being turned away. This fear of a second rejection, layered on top of their own confusing initial withdrawal, has likely contributed significantly to why the contradiction has continued as long as it has. Let me speak to what this person actually feels underneath all of this contradictory behavior, because I think this is the heart of what Spirit wants you to understand today. Their genuine feelings toward you have not changed. I want to say this directly and clearly. The distance they created does not reflect diminished feeling. If anything, I am sensing their feelings have remained remarkably consistent, perhaps even intensified, even as their behavior moved in the opposite direction. This is precisely what makes this situation so disorienting, both for them internally and likely for you as the person experiencing the confusing whiplash of their actions. I am sensing genuine love present here, alongside genuine fear that this love became too significant, too quickly, to feel safe. This combination, real love paired with real fear of that love's implications, often produces exactly the kind of contradictory behavior this reading is describing. People do not always act in alignment with their deepest feelings when those feelings frighten them more than comfort them. Does this feel like it is connecting to your own situation right now, Virgo? Has there been someone whose actions toward you have felt confusing, almost contradictory to what you sense they actually felt underneath the surface? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear how this is resonating with your own experience. I want to address what specifically might have made this person's own feelings frightening enough to produce this kind of contradictory behavior, because I think the root causes deserve real examination here. I am sensing past experience playing a significant role. This is likely someone who has been hurt before in a way that taught them caution around significant emotional investment, perhaps through a previous relationship that ended painfully, perhaps through earlier life experiences, even childhood patterns that taught them closeness eventually leads to loss or disappointment. When their feelings toward you grew to a depth that exceeded what felt familiar or safe, an old protective instinct activated, even though that instinct was working against what they genuinely wanted in this specific situation. I am also sensing something about timing and readiness that played a role here. There is a possibility that this person felt, consciously or not, that they were not yet equipped to handle a connection as significant as what was developing between you. Rather than communicating this honestly, which would have required its own vulnerability, they retreated instead, creating physical or emotional distance as a way of managing internal feelings. They did not yet have the tools to fully process or articulate. I want to add a third dimension to this exploration because Spirit is showing me something additional that I think deserves inclusion here. There may have been a specific moment, perhaps a conversation, perhaps simply a quiet realization, where this person understood with sudden clarity exactly how much you had come to mean to them. Rather than this clarity producing movement toward you, it produced the opposite reaction, a kind of overwhelm that triggered immediate retreat. This pattern, where clarity about deep feeling produces fear rather than confidence, often points toward earlier experiences where vulnerability was met with hurt or disappointment, teaching the nervous system to associate significant feeling with eventual danger rather than safety. I also want to speak to the possibility that external voices or circumstances contributed to this internal conflict. Sometimes people in someone's life, friends, family members, even their own internalized doubts about whether they deserve genuine happiness, add pressure that makes leaning into a real connection feel more complicated than it should. I am sensing this person may have absorbed messages, whether from others or from their own internal critic, suggesting that pursuing what they actually wanted was somehow unwise or premature, even though those messages did not reflect the genuine truth of the situation between you. I want to speak to what their daily experience has actually looked like since creating this distance, because I think the specifics matter here significantly. I am seeing someone who has been living with persistent internal discomfort, a sense of wrongness that follows them through their days, even when they are not consciously thinking about you directly. This discomfort comes from the dissonance between what they did and what they actually wanted, a kind of low-grade internal alarm that something important has gone sideways, even when they cannot always articulate exactly what or why. I am also sensing moments where this person has nearly reversed course, nearly reached out, nearly closed the distance they created, only to pull back again at the last moment. This pattern of approach and retreat is exhausting, both for them internally and for the situation itself, because it prevents any real resolution from occurring. Each time they get close to correcting their own contradictory behavior, the same fear that created the original distance resurfaces and stops them again. I want to describe this approach and retreat pattern in more specific detail because I think understanding its texture helps explain why this contradiction has been so persistent. I am sensing moments where this person has typed messages and deleted them, picked up their phone with intention to call only to set it back down, even driven near places where they might encounter you before turning around, before actually following through. These near attempts are not nothing. They represent the genuine pull toward you that exists underneath their contradictory actions, even as something else continues to override that pull each time it threatens to actually produce movement. I am also sensing that this pattern has likely produced significant frustration with themselves, a sense of watching their own behavior almost from the outside and feeling unable to fully understand or control it. This kind of self-observation, recognizing a pattern while feeling unable to immediately break it, is its own particular kind of difficult internal experience, distinct from simple sadness or regret, closer to a feeling of being at odds with one's own actions in a way that feels genuinely confusing even to the person experiencing it. Inhale with me for a moment, Virgo. I want to address something important about your own experience of this situation because I do not want this reading to focus only on their internal struggle while ignoring the real impact their contradictory behavior has had on you. Experiencing this kind of inconsistency from someone where their actions and their apparent feelings do not match is genuinely disorienting and painful. I am not minimizing that by explaining the psychological roots of their behavior. You deserved consistency. You deserved honesty about what was happening, even if that honesty would have been uncomfortable for them to offer. The fact that their internal conflict explains their behavior does not mean it excuses the confusion and hurt that behavior likely caused you. I want to speak to what is shifting now because Spirit is showing me genuine movement building beneath the surface of this person's continued contradictory behavior. I am sensing this internal conflict is approaching a breaking point, the kind of moment where continuing to act against their own genuine feelings becomes more exhausting than finally addressing the gap between their actions and their heart directly. This is not a comfortable process for them, but I am sensing real momentum building towards some kind of resolution, whether that resolution takes the form of honest communication with you, or at minimum, honest reckoning within themselves about what they actually want and why their behavior has not reflected it. Let me speak to what this resolution might actually look like when it arrives, because I think the practical shape of it matters here. For some of you, this is going to involve this person finally articulating the contradiction themselves, acknowledging directly that their actions did not match their feelings, and explaining, as honestly as they are capable of, what fear or pattern drove that disconnect. This kind of conversation requires significant vulnerability on their part, admitting not just that they hurt you, but that they hurt you while genuinely wanting the opposite, which can feel like an even more uncomfortable admission to make. For others, this resolution might unfold more gradually through a shift in behavior before any explicit conversation occurs. You may notice this person becoming more present again, more consistent, without necessarily naming directly what changed internally to produce that shift. I want you to pay attention to sustained behavioral change here, as much as, or more than, any words they eventually offer. I want to address something honest here, because I think this reading needs this layer of nuance rather than simply offering comfort without complexity. Understanding why someone acted against their own feelings does not automatically mean you owe them immediate forgiveness or renewed access to your life. Their internal conflict, while genuinely difficult for them to navigate, still resulted in real consequences for you. Confusion, hurt, perhaps significant pain during a period when their behavior contradicted what they actually felt. You are allowed to require more than an explanation before considering whether and how to move forward with this connection. I want to speak to what genuine repair would actually require here, beyond simply this person explaining their internal conflict. Real repair would include this person demonstrating through consistent behavior over time, rather than only through words in a single vulnerable conversation, that they have actually addressed the underlying fear or pattern that created the original contradiction. It is not enough for them to simply say they understand what they did. They need to show, through sustained, reliable presence and honesty going forward, that the gap between their actions and their feelings has actually closed, rather than simply being acknowledged once before, potentially recurring again under future pressure. I want to expand on this further because I think specificity helps you evaluate this situation more clearly if and when it unfolds. Watch for whether this person can articulate not just what they did, but why, with genuine self-awareness rather than vague gestures toward being scared or confused. Genuine understanding of one's own patterns tends to come with more precision than simply saying things got complicated or they were not sure what they wanted. If they can name the specific fear, the specific old pattern, the specific moment when their feelings became overwhelming enough to trigger retreat, that level of detail suggests real internal work has occurred rather than surface level explanation offered mainly to ease the discomfort of the conversation. I also want to address something about consistency specifically, because I think it deserves emphasis here. A single grand gesture or one deeply honest conversation, however meaningful in the moment, does not erase a pattern of contradictory behavior on its own. What matters more is what happens in the weeks following that conversation. Whether the new alignment between their actions and their stated feelings holds steady even during ordinary, less dramatic moments, or whether old patterns of withdrawal begin creeping back in once the initial intensity of reconciliation settles into everyday life. I want to speak to something about your own discernment as this situation continues to unfold, because I think it deserves direct attention. Trust your own observations here more than you trust promises or explanations alone. If this person does reach out, watch carefully for whether their renewed presence remains consistent over weeks rather than simply days, whether their actions continue to align with their stated feelings even when things become difficult or uncomfortable again. Genuine resolution of an internal conflict like this one tends to reveal itself through sustained reliability, not simply through a single moment of honest confession. I also want to speak to your own healing throughout this period of confusing distance, separate from whatever this person eventually does or says. You have likely spent real energy trying to make sense of behavior that did not align with what you sensed underneath it, trying to understand mixed signals that left you uncertain about where you actually stood. I want you to honor how exhausting that experience has likely been, and I want you to recognize that whatever clarity or peace you have found during this time belongs entirely to you, regardless of how this situation ultimately resolves. I want to go further into this because I think it deserves real attention rather than a brief mention. Living through someone's contradictory behavior, sensing love underneath actions that suggested otherwise, requires a particular kind of emotional labor that often goes unacknowledged. You have likely questioned your own perception more than once, wondering whether you were imagining the warmth you sensed beneath their distance, or whether you were simply hoping for something that was not actually there. This kind of self-doubt, layered on top of the original confusion their behavior created, adds its own weight to what you have been carrying throughout this period. I want you to know that your perception was likely accurate. The contradiction you sensed, the gap between what they did and what you felt was actually true underneath it, was real. Trusting that perception, even without external confirmation, took its own kind of strength. And I want you to recognize that strength in yourself, regardless of what happens next in this particular story. As I bring this reading toward its close, I want to leave you with the complete picture Spirit shared today. This person created a separation they genuinely did not want, driven by fear and old protective patterns, rather than any actual diminishment of feeling toward you. Their actions have been working against their own heart this entire time, creating internal conflict and discomfort that is now approaching a point where resolution feels more necessary than continuing the contradiction. When that resolution arrives, whether through honest conversation or through sustained behavioral change, receive it with appropriate discernment, requiring genuine, demonstrated consistency rather than simply accepting explanation alone as sufficient grounds for fully reopening this connection. Trust yourself to know what you genuinely need before you decide what role, if any, this person should have in your life moving forward. If this reading resonated with you today, please share it with a Virgo who might be navigating confusing, contradictory behavior from someone in their own life right now. And let me know in the comments if this connects to a specific situation you have been trying to make sense of. I read every comment and I carry your stories with genuine care long after this video ends. Until next time, Virgo. Their actions were never the full truth, but you still deserve more than their internal conflict alone before you decide what comes next.